The room is full. Conversations overlap, laughter bounces off the walls, and everyone seems eager to be noticed. Yet in the middle of it all, one person walks in quietly. No grand entrance, no loud voice, no attempt to impress. Still, something shifts. Heads turn slightly, eyes linger a bit longer, and without saying a word, that person begins to command attention, not by force, but by presence. Across the room, someone else tries harder. They speak more, laugh louder, add extra energy to every sentence. Yet somehow they fade into the background. Their effort is visible, almost tangible, but it doesn't translate into respect or influence. It feels unfair, almost confusing. Because deep down, it seems like confidence should come from doing more. But reality tells a different story. In everyday life, this silent contrast plays out constantly. In meetings where one voice carries more weight than 5 others combined. In social gatherings where a calm presence outshines the most talkative person. Even online, where some individuals effortlessly attract attention while others struggle to be heard. The difference is rarely talent, intelligence, or even experience. It is something far more subtle, something most people overlook. Confidence is not always loud. It is not always visible in the ways people expect. More often, it hides in small behaviors. Tiny signals the human mind picks up instantly, almost unconsciously. These signals shape how others perceive you long before you get the chance to explain yourself. And once that perception is formed, it becomes incredibly difficult to change. This is where everything begins to shift, because confidence is not just a feeling you wait for. It is a behavior you practice. And the people who seem naturally confident are often just repeating patterns that quietly influence how they are seen and treated. In the next few minutes, you are going to discover 6 powerful behaviors that can change the way people respond to you. Without forcing anything, without pretending to be someone else. Small adjustments that create a completely different presence. Confidence has been misunderstood for a long time. It is often confused with loudness, boldness, or the ability to dominate a room with words. The world tends to celebrate the most expressive voices, the most energetic personalities, and the most visible individuals. But beneath that surface, something quieter and far more powerful is at work. Because true confidence is not about how much space you take up. It is about how much control you carry within yourself. In real-life situations, this difference becomes clear. Think of a workplace meeting where several people are speaking at once, trying to prove their ideas, trying to be heard. Then someone speaks calmly, without rushing, without trying to compete for attention. Their words are fewer, but they land with weight. People pause, listen, and respond differently. That moment is not driven by volume. It is driven by presence. And presence is built through behavior, not personality. Psychologically, the human brain is constantly scanning for signals, tiny cues that suggest confidence, authority, or uncertainty. These cues come from posture, tone, timing, and even silence. Within seconds, people form impressions that feel accurate even when they are not. This is why 2 people can say the exact same thing, yet one is respected while the other is overlooked. The message is the same, but the behavior behind it changes everything. Another truth that often goes unnoticed is that confidence does not mean the absence of fear. Many people assume that confident individuals are fearless, always certain, always in control. But in reality, they experience doubt just like everyone else. The difference lies in how they behave despite that feeling. They do not allow internal hesitation to dictate external action. Instead, they rely on consistent patterns that project stability, even when they feel uncertain inside. This is where the shift happens. Confidence stops being something abstract, something you either have or don't have, and becomes something practical, something trainable. When you understand that confidence is built through repeated behaviors, it becomes less mysterious and more controllable. It is no longer about changing who you are, but about adjusting how you show up. And once those adjustments begin, the response from the world begins to change as well. People listen differently, they respond differently, they treat you differently. Not because you suddenly became a different person, but because the signals you send have changed. And those signals are exactly what we are about to break down. The signal shows up before a single word is spoken. A slight hunch in the shoulders, quick, restless movements, eyes that scan the room too often. These details seem small, almost invisible, yet they carry a message the brain reads instantly. In a job interview, for example, two candidates may have the same qualifications, but the one who sits upright, moves calmly, and holds steady eye contact often leaves a stronger impression. Not because they said more, but because their body spoke first. Body language is one of the most powerful tools of confidence, and most people use it unconsciously. When movements are rushed, it suggests urgency or uncertainty. When posture collapses inward, it signals discomfort or self-protection. But when the body is still, open, and controlled, it communicates something entirely different: stability. The human mind naturally associates stillness with control, and control with confidence. This is why the calmest person in a tense situation often appears to be the most powerful. In everyday life, this plays out in subtle but consistent ways. Walking into a room with measured steps instead of hurried ones. Sitting without constantly adjusting your position. Holding eye contact just long enough to show engagement without turning it into a stare. These are not dramatic actions, yet they shift how others interpret your presence. People may not consciously notice them, but they feel them, and that feeling shapes their reaction to you. There is also a deeper psychological loop at work. When you adjust your body language, your internal state begins to follow. Standing upright, slowing your movements, and maintaining composure sends signals back to your brain that reinforce a sense of control. It becomes a feedback system. Your body influences your mind, and your mind strengthens your behavior. Over time, what started as a conscious adjustment begins to feel natural. This is why confidence is often seen before it is heard. Long before you explain your ideas, introduce yourself, or make your point, your body has already created an impression. And in many cases, that first impression determines how everything else will be received. By learning to control these physical signals, you are not just changing how you look, you are changing how people interpret your entire presence. The conversation moves quickly. Ideas are being thrown around, opinions layered on top of opinions, and there is a quiet pressure to contribute immediately. In moments like this, many people begin to talk more than they need to, stretching their explanations, repeating themselves, adding extra words just to maintain attention. But somewhere in that flow, clarity begins to fade. The message weakens, not because it lacks value, but because it is buried under too much noise. Then there is the opposite presence. Someone listens fully, takes a brief pause, and responds with just a few words, clear, direct, and intentional. The room slows down, even if only for a second. That pause creates space, and that space gives their words weight. It is not the length of what they say that stands out, but the precision. And in that moment, they appear more confident, more certain, even if their idea is not necessarily better. From a psychological standpoint, over-explaining is often interpreted as a subtle signal of insecurity. It suggests a need to convince, to justify, or to seek agreement. On the other hand, concise communication signals clarity of thought and internal certainty. When someone expresses an idea without rushing or overloading it, the brain interprets that as confidence. Silence, in this context, becomes a tool, not an absence, but a form of control. In everyday interactions, this behavior can completely change how you are perceived. Instead of filling every gap in conversation, allow brief pauses to exist. Instead of explaining your point multiple times, deliver it once, clearly and calmly. Instead of reacting instantly, take a second to process before responding. These small shifts may feel uncomfortable at first, especially in environments where speaking quickly is the norm, but they gradually reshape how others engage with you. There is also a deeper effect that unfolds over time. When you speak less but say more, people begin to listen more carefully when you do speak. Your words carry anticipation, not just information. You are no longer competing for attention, you are guiding it. And in that shift, confidence becomes less about effort and more about presence. The pattern is subtle, almost invisible, yet it shows up everywhere. A sentence ends with a soft check for validation. Tone slightly raised, words carefully softened, as if waiting for permission to stand. In conversations, it sounds like uncertainty wrapped inside politeness. In professional settings, it appears as hesitation before expressing an idea, followed by a quick glance around the room searching for agreement. The intention is to be accepted, but the signal it sends is something else entirely. In a team meeting, for example, two people present similar ideas. One states their point clearly and stops. The other explains, adds disclaimers, and finishes with a quiet attempt to confirm, seeking reassurance that their thought is valid. Even if both ideas are equally strong, the perception shifts immediately. One feels grounded, the other feels unsure. And once that perception forms, it begins to influence how others respond moving forward. Psychologically, approval-seeking behavior communicates a lack of internal validation. It suggests that confidence depends on external agreement rather than internal clarity. The human mind picks up on this quickly, often without conscious awareness. People tend to place more trust in individuals who appear self-assured even when their ideas are challenged. Not because they are always right, but because they project stability in their thinking. In everyday interactions, breaking this pattern requires small but deliberate changes. Express your thoughts without softening them unnecessarily. Allow your statements to stand without immediately justifying or defending them. Accept that not everyone will agree and resist the urge to adjust your position simply to gain approval. These moments may feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you are used to maintaining harmony. But they begin to reshape how others perceive your confidence. Over time, something important begins to shift. When you stop seeking approval, you start building it internally. Your words become more direct, your presence more grounded, and your decisions less dependent on external reactions. people begin to respond to that stability, not because you demanded it, but because you demonstrated it. And in that quiet transition, confidence becomes less about being accepted and more about standing firm in your own voice. The difference is easy to miss, but once you see it, it becomes impossible to ignore. One person moves quickly, almost rushing through space, adjusting their clothes, shifting their weight, checking their surroundings repeatedly. Every movement feels reactive, as if driven by an unseen pressure. Another person walks into the same environment at a steady pace, gestures only when necessary, and seems completely unbothered by the need to prove anything. The contrast is not dramatic, yet the impact is undeniable. In public spaces, this behavior quietly shapes perception. Walking too fast, fidgeting constantly, or making abrupt movements often signals nervous energy. The brain interprets this as a lack of control, even if the person is highly capable. On the other hand, slow, deliberate movement suggests awareness and composure. It communicates that there is no urgency to impress, no need to rush, and no underlying tension driving the behavior. That sense of calm control naturally draws attention. From a psychological perspective, intentional movement is closely tied to perceived dominance and confidence. When someone controls the pace of their actions, they appear more grounded in the moment. Their gestures feel purposeful rather than accidental, and their presence becomes more noticeable without requiring extra effort. This is why individuals who move with calm precision often stand out, even in crowded or competitive environments. In everyday life, this shift can be practiced in simple ways. Walking with a steady rhythm instead of rushing from place to place. Reducing unnecessary movements such as constant phone checking or adjusting your posture repeatedly. Allowing your gestures to match your words rather than overusing them to fill space. These adjustments may seem minor, but they create a visible sense of control that others respond to almost instantly. Over time, this behavior begins to influence not just how others see you, but how you experience yourself. Slowing down your movements reduces internal tension, making you feel more present and aware. That awareness reinforces confidence, creating a cycle where your actions and your mindset begin to align. And in that alignment, your presence becomes stronger, not because you are doing more, but because you are doing everything with intention. The moment doesn't last long, but the impact lingers. A presentation doesn't go as planned. Words come out slightly wrong, reactions feel colder than expected, and the silence afterwards seems heavier than usual. Hours later, the scene begins to replay in the mind. Every detail magnified, every mistake stretched, every reaction analyzed. What happened externally may have been brief, but internally it becomes something much bigger. This is where confidence is quietly shaped. Not in the moment of success, but in the interpretation of failure. Two people can experience the same setback, yet walk away with completely different outcomes. One sees it as proof of inadequacy, reinforcing doubt and hesitation the next time they face a similar situation. The other sees it as feedback, something to adjust, refine, and move past. The event is the same, but the internal narrative changes everything. Psychologically, the brain is wired to protect identity. When something goes wrong, it searches for meaning, often linking the outcome to self-worth. This is why failure can feel personal, even when it is situational. However, confident individuals disrupt this pattern. Instead of internalizing failure as a reflection of who they are, they treat it as information about what happened. They separate identity from outcome, allowing them to move forward without carrying unnecessary weight. In everyday situations, this shift can be practiced intentionally. After a mistake, resist the urge to label yourself negatively. Focus on what can be learned rather than what went wrong. Replace harsh internal criticism with neutral observation. This does not mean ignoring failure. It means processing it in a way that preserves stability. Over time, this approach reduces the emotional intensity of setbacks and increases the willingness to take action again. As this pattern strengthens, something begins to change. Fear loses its grip, not because failure disappears, but because its meaning evolves. It becomes less of a threat and more of a step. Confidence grows in that space, not from perfection, but from resilience. And in that quiet shift, the mind becomes less focused on avoiding mistakes and more focused on moving forward with clarity. It often starts with hesitation. A thought forms, something to say, a question to ask, a moment to step forward, but it quickly meets resistance. The mind begins to calculate outcomes, to predict reactions, to imagine discomfort. In that brief pause, action is delayed and then quietly dismissed. Nothing dramatic happens, yet something important is lost. Not just the moment, but the opportunity to reinforce confidence. In social environments, this pattern repeats more often than most people realize. Choosing not to speak in a meeting, avoiding eye contact with someone new, holding back an opinion to maintain comfort. Each decision feels small and harmless on its own, but over time they build a habit of retreat, and that habit slowly shapes identity, turning hesitation into a default response. Confident individuals operate differently, not because they are always comfortable, but because they act despite discomfort. They take small, consistent social risks, speaking up even when their voice feels uncertain, initiating conversations without overthinking the outcome, asking questions without worrying about judgment. These actions may seem simple, but they create a powerful psychological shift. From a behavioral standpoint, confidence grows through exposure, not avoidance. Each time you step into a slightly uncomfortable situation and handle it, your brain updates its understanding of what is safe. What once felt intimidating begins to feel familiar. And with familiarity comes ease. Over time, these repeated exposures reduce anxiety and build a sense of control that cannot be developed through thinking alone. In everyday life, this can be practiced in subtle ways. Greeting someone first instead of waiting. Sharing an idea without perfect preparation. Holding eye contact a second longer than usual. These are not extreme actions, yet they stretch your comfort zone just enough to create growth. And because they are small, they can be repeated daily, turning confidence into a habit rather than a rare moment. As these behaviors accumulate, something begins to shift internally. The fear of judgment loses intensity and the need for perfection starts to fade. You begin to trust your ability to handle situations rather than avoid them. And in that growing trust, confidence becomes less about how you feel and more about what you consistently choose to do. Confidence, in the end, is not a sudden transformation. It does not arrive overnight, and it does not depend on a perfect moment where everything finally aligns. It is built quietly through repeated actions that most people overlook. The way you sit, the way you speak, the way you respond to pressure, the way you interpret failure, these small behaviors shape something far more powerful than temporary motivation. They shape identity. Across everything explored, a clear pattern begins to emerge. Confidence is not something you wait to feel before you act. It is something you create through behavior, long before the feeling catches up. When you control your body language, speak with intention, stop seeking approval, move with calm precision, reframe failure, and take small social risks, you are not just changing how others see you. You are training your mind to see yourself differently. In real life, the impact of this shift becomes undeniable. Conversations begin to flow differently. People respond with more attention, more respect, and more openness. Situations that once felt intimidating begin to feel manageable. Not because the world has changed, but because your presence within it has evolved. And once that presence becomes consistent, confidence stops being something you chase and starts becoming something you carry. But understanding this is only the beginning. The real change happens in practice. In the next conversation, the next meeting, the next moment where hesitation appears, those are the testing grounds. Those are the moments where behavior either stays the same or begins to shift. And every small shift, repeated over time, builds something stronger than confidence alone. It builds control. This is exactly what this channel is about. The Behavior Lab is not just a place to learn ideas. It is a space to understand, test, and refine the behaviors that shape how people think, act, and respond. Human psychology is not abstract. It is something you live every single day, often without realizing it. And once you begin to see it clearly, you begin to move differently within it. If this is the kind of insight you want to keep building, then stay connected to the Behavior Lab. Because here we break down the patterns behind confidence, influence, and human behavior. So you are not just reacting to the world, you are understanding it and moving through it with intention.